Welcome to Inquiry. I'm your host, Eugene Kearns, having a conversation with author Peter Flom on Screwed Up Somehow, but Not Stupid. And as such, Peter, what is the raison d'etre of the book? For what purpose did you write the book?
I wrote the book to inform people and hopefully help people who either have or are related to or are teaching elderly people in general, but particularly people with nonverbal learning disability, which is a relatively little known disability, LD, unlike dyslexia, which almost everybody in education has heard of. So that's the basic reason.
Thank you. And before we start with talking about NLDs, non-verbal learning disabilities, how would you define a disability?
My definition, I mean, there are legal definitions for aid and stuff. My definitions of disability is something that disables you. So if there's something that most people can do easily, that you can only do with a whole lot of effort or can't do at all, that's a disability. And disabilities are context specific. If you were born 400 years ago in Europe and you had dyslexia, no one would care because only about 2% of the population could read. So you can't read, who cares? It's like everybody else. On the other hand, if you were born today and couldn't have any sense of balance and therefore couldn't ride a horse, no one cares. 400 years ago, that would have been a big problem. So that's basically, a disability is something that disables you.
And now let's go into what a non-verbal learning disability is.
Okay.
So what is a learning disability in general? And then what is a non-verbal aspect of it?
So a learning disability, generally speaking, is a situation where a person has some area of life where they learn much more slowly or with much more difficulty than they do for most other things. So as opposed to someone, people in general could be really smart or average or less than average in whatever we want to define intelligence as, which we don't need to get into that. With learning disability, you have one area that's much worse. So for instance, a lot of people can't spell. And I've known a number of people who are very, very smart, successful, do great in school, have careers, but they can't spell at all, just like amazingly not spelling, okay? One of my best friends is like that. My former brother-in-law was like that. All right, so that's a pretty clear learning disability. You have people who have enormous trouble with math and are fine at everything else. So not like not being able to learn differential calculus, but not being able to figure out percentages, okay? So these are people who are fine. They're not, intellectually disabled in general. They do everything like normal human beings, but they can't figure out how to convert currencies. I've known people like that. You teach them, it's like, wait, how much is a euro compared to $1? And now right now it's easy because they're almost equal, but they just won't learn it. And it's like, how does this happen?
And what is a non-verbal learning disability?
Okay, so first, it's a really terrible name because it makes people think you're nonverbal, and obviously I'm verbal. What it is problems with nonverbal aspects of communication. That's the main definition. So when we communicate with somebody, we use words, but we use all sorts of other things as well. We use tone of voice, speed of speech, body language, facial expression, but we also communicate with things that are less familiar. Two relatively unfamiliar words are proxemics and objectives. So proxemics is how close are you to somebody? Every society has rules for how close you should be to somebody. And there's different kinds of situations. So what's okay between two lovers is not okay between two close friends, which isn't okay between acquaintances, which isn't okay between strangers. One thing is that it's different in different societies, okay? Another is that it's complicated because, for instance, even if you're living in one society, what's okay in a crowded subway or a crowded elevator would be weird or offensive or even sexually harassment in an empty elevator. You get into an empty elevator with a woman and you stand right behind her, like practically touching, that's no good. But you get into an elevator with 2,500 people and you're all jammed together, that's okay. There's rules like front to back is different than front to front. You can be closer to someone's back. So that's proxemics. And then there's objectics, which is what you wear, what you own, how you present yourself, which also says things about you, okay? And is supposed to match the situation, okay? So, you know, you don't go to restaurants in a bathing suit, just to take a completely obvious example, but there's much more subtle ones. Like I get invitations to things, okay? It says cocktail attire. And I say, what in the world is cocktail? Typically, if I have a cocktail at home, I might be wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. I know they don't mean that, but what cocktail attire? Okay, so they don't communicate clearly. They don't say wear a suit, wear a collared shirt, anything goes, wear shorts, you know, they're casual. Oh, what is casual? Most neurotypical people derive this, and everybody gets it wrong sometimes, but neurotypical people figure out from the nature of the event, the nature of the venue, how well they know people, and all sorts of other things, what they're supposed to be wearing. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. Then I say there's also problems with space and time. So I get lost a lot. I got lost going to the first day of 6th grade, even though I live in Manhattan, which for people who aren't in Manhattan, Manhattan is a grid. Okay, the part I was in anyway was a grid. North-south streets, east-west streets, and they jut together, you know, they're just perfectly perpendicular. And I had been to the school before, and I had the address, and I was only 6 blocks from my house. On the first day, my mom sends me off to school. Half an hour later, I'm back home crying because I can't find the place. In graduate school, I mean, obviously much later, I would get lost on the campus. For most people in graduate school, this is not a particularly big problem. When there was a blackout in, I think, 1977, I was a teenager, and I was living with my parents in an apartment I had lived in for a long time. And I was trying to find my way downstairs because it was a 2-story apartment. And my parents found me half an hour later crawling around, but completely turned off. I got completely disoriented. So I got lost in my own apartment. So the level of loss, you know, when you tell people you get lost a lot, they say, oh, I get lost. I say, not like that. Problems with time, like remembering when things happened and figuring out how long things take. Okay, so for instance, if I have to ask, you know, did you get married? Put these in order. You know, you got married, you got into grad school, you had your first kid, and you got your degree. Okay, now I know I got married before I had the kid. I know I got into grad school before I got the degree, but I have to really think about it to mesh the two. So that sort of thing. And then figuring out how long things take is also a problem.
Thank you for that, Peter. So just to be summarized, to be succinct. So you're an NLD. You're a non-verbal learning disabled person, but you don't sound very disabled because you don't have a regular learning disability. Your disability is not based on verbal communication. So the reason why you sound very coherent is because you're very good at verbal communication.
I'm good at this. Is good for me. Text is great for me. I wrote a book. You know, I can write. I'm very verbal.
Right. And that causes a problem. So an NLD is more of a problem with nonverbal communication. And as you mentioned, there is a bunch of ways how we communicate with others, which are not based on verbal communication. Besides distance and attires, understanding emotions is nonverbal. How to respond to somebody's facial gestures, body postures.
Right.
All of that is very difficult for an NLD versus a neurotypical person. It takes a lot more mental bandwidth, and mental bandwidth is short for just the ability to process information. So for an NLD, it takes a lot longer and a lot more energy strain on the mental bandwidth to process those signals, which can be extremely misunderstanding for other people.
Yes.
And just and as you mentioned, neurotypical people have problems. So even neurotypical people have problems understanding culture and emotion and all of the various things that you mentioned. But NLDs have it much worse.
We have it much worse. I mean, one analogy is to imagine if you go to a foreign country and not, not one that's a very similar culture. I mean, not like Canada or something, but someplace it's very different. And okay, the language is different, but you expect that. If you go to Italy, you know that you're not going to be able to speak Italian. You'll have to find people who speak English, blah, blah, blah. But all sorts of other things are different. Okay. For instance, Italians touch each other much more than Americans do. Okay. So Italians famously, you have the whole greeting thing with kisses, which is not something people do in America. You have how close people stand to each other. You have gestures. Okay, different gestures mean different things, so that you have to learn all that. Now, if you're in a foreign country, you say, okay, this is different. I have to get used to it, but I'm going back home, and then I'll go back home to the place where things are normal. And also, when people know that you're foreign, they're going to make some exception, some leniency towards you, especially if you're in a place where tourists are pretty common. You go to one of the big cities of Europe or Asia, tourists are common. They're going to say, "Oh yeah, he's from America. He acts weird," and similar to when people from foreign countries come here. We're like that all the time. So it's like, oh, what does this mean? And the trouble also is that all of these things happen in real time. You keep on changing your facial expression. It's not like, oh, right now, let's see, his mouth is turned up, but his eyes are a little open. And no, by the time that happens, you're 5 expressions down the road.
Sorry, 1 second. And as you point out in your book, NLDs can cause a lot of confusions. For example, you just turned your face. So to a neurotypical person, that can mean you're not paying attention. But to an NLD, it means that you're paying attention. You just need to process that information, and the wall or the ceiling doesn't have as much emotional context. So you're processing the words on a blank sheet of wall rather than on somebody's facial expression.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm also what they call 2E, twice exceptional. So there's something which I'm really, really good at, which makes people even more confused. So I learned to read at a relatively normal age, like I think 5, but I quickly got very, very good at it. And in 5th grade, I took some standardized test, Stanford Achievement Test, I think it was called. And I scored like above 12th grade reading level. Okay. I do well at math. I mean, I was a statistician. I do pretty well at math. People say, oh, you can't be learning disabled. You're good at reading and you're good at math. I say, well, yeah, but there's other stuff in life besides reading and math.
And as you point out in your book, NLD people tend to think in words rather than images or other types of thinking. As you mentioned, differences within NLD, what makes NLD different even among NLDs?
Well, typically, like in the first big book on NLD, they said that people with NLD don't have a sense of humor and that we're bad at math. Now, I disagree about the humor. I think most NLD people do have a good sense of humor, but certain types of humor we don't get. Math is mostly not good for people with NLD because most people who are good at math are very visual, but not everybody. Okay. The sense of humor thing is more that some of us have trouble with things like sarcasm because it depends on tone of voice a lot, but I don't have a problem with understanding sarcasm. I have not yet met an NLD person who thinks that practical jokes are funny. Okay, we all just think you're just being mean. You're being obnoxious. Why is that amusing? a lot of us have trouble with the distinction between good-natured teasing and being obnoxious. Okay, so when people get together with friends, they can tease each other, and it doesn't mean it's not serious. It's a weird form of, and it took me a long time to realize that, and I still have trouble sometimes distinguishing between teasing and, insulting.
Yeah, I also have a lot of fun teasing my friend and vice versa. Uh, you mentioned that there's a lot of confusion between even thinking about yourself as an NLD. A lot of people are confused about what an NLD is. Part of the confusion as you write in a book is because NLD is a mental disability. It's not observable, unlike other disabilities. Do you want to explain why NLDs are so difficult to understand?
Sure. Well, I divide disabilities into like three groups. There's visible disabilities. You're in a wheelchair, you're on crutches, you're blind and using a cane, something like that. And everybody can tell. They may treat you well or badly. They may be, it doesn't by any means solve your problems. You still have a very big issue with the disability, but it's visible. Then there's what I call single invisible disability. This is like dyslexia. Okay, there's no sign with a D on your forehead, oh, it's dyslexic. But even if you're not dyslexic, you can sort of understand. You can say, oh, that task involves reading. Bob might not be good at that because it's about reading. Or I could say, my friend David, I will not trust him to spell anything, even with spell check, he can go wrong. Okay. But then there's what I call double invisible disabilities, because these are things where you're disabled in stuff that most people learn without being actively taught. Some people learn to read on their own. Most people are taught to read. Virtually everybody is taught mathematics. So on the other hand, you never went to a class in how to make a friend, how to stand, how far does, no teacher ever said, Eugene, now when you're close with somebody, you can stand 1 foot away, but when you just meet somebody for the first time, you have to stand, nobody did that to you. You just somehow, you weren't born knowing it, okay? You weren't born knowing almost anything. Human newborn babies are very, very incapable of almost everything, Everything was learned. Okay, how did you learn it? Somehow it happened, and it happens to the vast majority of people. Now, it happens a little differently to each person, because even within a culture, some people will stand closer or farther. Some people have different gestures and all that. People have different dressing styles, like hats. You're wearing a hat. These days, a lot of people don't wear hats, but that doesn't mean that's not wrong. It's just a little different, okay? Whereas if you showed up for this interview without a shirt, that would be weird. That would just be strange, okay? So, yeah.
It turns out that while reading a book, there are so many things in the book that related to who I am. Therefore, I think that I am also an NLD. But we'll talk about that later, because I think through words, and I obviously read a lot and I'm do better at reading than other stuff, which brings me up to the next conversation, to the next question, which is, can NLD improve nonverbal communication through practice? For example, you mentioned school and being taught, and neurotypical not being taught, but NLDs need to be taught how to understand emotions and body language and all that nuance. Can you actually practice enough emotion to understand verbal communication as an NLD?
Well, I think we understand emotion. I think you can learn some of it, but it's tricky, because, one thing that you could do is look at photos of people from a magazine or whatever, and then go over with somebody else, a friend or whoever, teacher, if you're a kid, and say, what emotion is this person showing? Okay, so that could help. But as I said, one problem is that facial expressions keep changing constantly, so you get a little better. I don't think you ever get great. I think we can try to learn rules. For instance, just a few years ago, a woman who I know online told me a rule. She said that if you're at a party and there's a group of people and you want to know, should I join that group of people? If they're standing with their feet parallel, they don't want you to join. And if they're standing with their feet open, they want you to join. Now, I learned that amazing, okay. Or I learned in an anthropology book that if two people look directly into each other's eyes for more than 6 seconds in a row, they're about to either fight or make love, okay? So you would never taught this, but I learned it as a rule. And you can try this out. Now, be careful who you try this out with. But if you go to a friend and you start looking directly in their eyes for at about 6 seconds, both of you will start to feel weird because you don't want to do either of those things. And you're giving this signal. Hey, Elena, okay. But then somebody says, okay, so you have to look away sometimes. But then you have to be careful where you look away. Because the idea is not to be looking at Eugene and then looking off here. You have to sort of just vary your gaze slightly. So it's like, but then there's cultural issues there too. For instance, one big cultural difference that caused a lot of problems in many Latino cultures, children are taught that you look down when an adult is addressing you as a sign of respect, okay? And in American cultures, many people are taught that you look at a person as a sign of respect. But this can cause big clashes because if a kid's in school and the teacher is angry, the kid looks down, and then the teacher is getting angrier, and the teacher is looking down more, and it just cycles because the cultures are clashing. Neither one of these is right or wrong. It's just there's different standards of culture, as opposed to, say, spelling, where, math is spelled M-A-T-H, not M-A-T-W or whatever, just right or wrong.
On cultures, so in terms of practicing emotions and how we practice them differ based on, like you just mentioned, with different behaviors. It can be that a cultures create a more isolating peoples, as in right now, the United States for the past 40 or so years have become more isolated as individuals. We know less and less people. We have less contact, therefore we don't practice enough emotions. How would you differentiate between neurotypical people who just can't understand emotions and other forms of nonverbal and NLDs?
Well, I don't want to speak for other NLDers here. I haven't asked a lot of them, but I had a really good pandemic. And my therapist said that if everyone not only does have her patients, but of her family and her friends, I adjusted the best. Why? Well, because texting is perfect. It's all verbal. And even Zoom, it gets rid of a lot of the stuff I've been talking about. Now, we still have facial expression, of course, but all I see is your shoulders up, okay? I don't have to worry about your body language or you about mine. I don't have to worry about how close I am to you. I don't have to worry about looking at you and not looking at you, because you can't, you can tell if I'm looking way apart, but you can't tell where exactly I'm looking. And it's even more in a group, okay? If there's 10 people, like when we have the groups, no one knows where anyone is looking. They're looking at the camera. So it gets rid of a lot of those, but it gets rid of the problems of choosing clothing, because on Zoom calls, pretty much anything goes, like, well, there was that guy who got in trouble for being naked on a Zoom call, but, it's much more relaxed than the situation in real life. And then texting and emailing is perfect because it's all my strength. That's just exactly what I'm good at. Also, I'm introverted. Not all NLD people are introverted, but I am. So I'm like, oh, good. If I stay home all day, people think, oh, Peter's avoiding COVID. Whereas I might be staying home just because I like staying home, And you're like, why do you stay home all day? It's like, well, people that, it's a beautiful day. Why don't you go outside? I say, well, I have my window wide open and my blinds open. The sun is coming in, the wind air is coming in. Why do I have to go outside to get fresh air? I never really figured, but most people do. So, obviously it's horrible that so many people died and it's economic problems and all sorts of other problems. I'm not saying that's not okay, but compared to a lot of people, I reacted well to the whole pandemic thing.
And as you mentioned, the difficulties with NLD or having NLD, what are the different approaches on how you manage your NLD, and how would you guide or suggest others manage their NLDs?
Well, I use an analogy. I say, if you have a disability, it's like a mountain between where you are and where you want to go for any disability. There's 4 things you could do. You could give up. You could work really hard, like digging through the mountain. You could take longer, like going over the top of the mountain, or you could go around the mountain. And I think when you listen to well-meaning people, especially if you're a kid, if you listen to well-meaning teachers or your parents, and they're trying to help, they ignore the first option and the last option. And it's very strange. I mean, give up. Well, yes, there are some things you should give up on. And even NT people know this. Okay, what should you do for a living? Well, if you're short, slow, and uncoordinated, you're not going to be a professional basketball player. I'm sorry, you're just not. You could practice till your hands are bloody. You're just not going to be a professional basketball player. You can't sing. You're not going to be an opera. I mean, duh, right? But people will tell you, oh, you could do anything you want to do if you try hard enough, never give up. Sometimes giving up is the right thing to do. So you never hear that. You almost never hear, Peter, maybe you should just stop trying at this. This isn't what you should be doing. And then the last option people don't know about, and that I think of as tricks to get around your NLD. Like getting lost in New York. Well, one thing I figured out is that at least in Manhattan, on the north side of the street, the numbers are all odd. And on the south side of the street, the numbers are all even. Now I tell this to people and they say, really, I never noticed. So I say, yeah, they lived in New York all their life, they never noticed it. So now if I'm at an odd number building and I come out, I can look and say, oh, I'm at 31. So if I face the building, I'm facing north. If I'm facing north, then right is east and left is west. And now I know where I am. Whereas most people, you go in a building, you come out, you just know where to go. So there are some tricks I developed. I was never good at memorizing like the multiplication tables and things like that. So I made up tricks for all of the times tables. Some of them I learned from other people, some of them I made up myself. I remember when I took the WISC, the Wechsler Intelligence Skills for Children, on the general information, I missed the question of where does the sun rise? And I got really upset that I didn't know, because I knew I was supposed to know that. So I said, sets almost rhymes with west. So I said, oh, sets west. So it sets in the west, and that's how I remember where the sun sets. Even though I'm in Manhattan, I walk east and west. Being early all the time for things, I bring a book. And that way, if I get to the airport way too early, I sit in a chair and I read a book. No big deal. So I do a lot of that. And then sometimes the middle 2 methods are important. But I think people forget about the first and the last option.
And would you like to remind us what those options are, just in case?
What is?
What are the options again?
Oh, giving up, going around the mountain. Going over the mountain, going through the mountain, and going around the mountain.
And depending on the context, some of them might be better than the alternatives.
You have to, look, there are some things you have to do. You can't give up on, okay? There's certain basic requirements of life. But I suck at making beds, so I don't make the bed. The bed is messy. All right. This is not the end of the world, When I change the sheets, then I make the bed. And then other than that, it doesn't get that messy. And if someone's coming over, then I try to make it look something, but I don't make the bed. No big deal. On the other hand, if you say, oh, I can't manage, to put on clothing, then that's, well, I don't know anybody who can't manage that. But there are some things in life where you have to be able to you have to be able to stand online in a store without getting upset and without bumping into people and without, and of course that all changed during COVID. Oh, now stand 6 feet apart. And now we've got another confusing situation because it's like, well, we don't really mean it about the 6 feet apart, but maybe not quite so, during COVID, it was great. There were many students had these markers, stand here, stand here. Oh, you stand on a marker. You know you're not too close or too far. Now it's like, well, nobody's really paying attention to those exactly, but they're not quite as close. So, you have to be able to do that somehow.
And as you wrote this book for people with NLD and others like teachers and parents, so how would you apply these concepts of using the analogy of the mountain to help teachers teach those with NLD and parents help their children if their children are NLD?
Well, so I think, first you have to remember that sometimes giving up is okay. So one job of a teacher, or especially a parent, is to help their kid figure out what they should be doing and not doing, okay? Some things you have to learn, some things you don't have to learn. I can't draw at all. And lots of people have tried to teach me to draw. And I don't mean I can't draw a picture of Eugene that looks like Eugene. I mean, I can't draw a cube, okay? I can't draw. That's okay. So Peter, maybe you could get excused from art, okay? Because it's not gonna work on me. You could work, once a kid gets into special education, they get a thing called an IEP, which is an individualized education program or plan. And I think there's a lot of things that could be written into these that aren't usually written in. They've gotten a lot better since I was a kid. For instance, extra time is a common accommodation. Extra time wouldn't have done me any good at all. I was always the first one done on tests, whether I got an F or an A or anywhere in between. A scribe, though, which is someone who writes the answers, you tell them the answers and they dictate, would have been enormously helpful. Nowadays, of course, a lot of things are done on computers, so you're typing yourself, which would have made it a lot easier. I'm 63, so we didn't have any of that when I was in school. Not learning cursive, okay? If your kid can't learn cursive, you know what? That's okay. You can go through your entire life without knowing cursive and you'll be all right. Maybe it's nice to be able to write a handwritten thank you note that looks beautiful, but it's not an essential life skill. And then figuring out what they're good at and emphasizing that. There's also like looking out for certain things. Like I think a teacher, one sign of an NLD kid is if the kid is at the age where most children are dressing in ways that make their parents tear their hair out, and one kid is dressing like his mother picked out his clothes, that might be a sign. Because a lot of NLD people just don't care about clothes. If your kid is not making friends, but you can't quite figure out why, like they're not blatantly obnoxious, they don't have, raging acne, they're, anything like that, then look and think maybe this is NLD, maybe because this is stuff that turns people off without them knowing it. If you're behaving inappropriately all the time, people don't want to be around you, okay?
And as you mentioned, they're not purposely trying to be inappropriate. They're just coping the best way they can.
Exactly.
And as such, in your book, you make an issue of labels. So how would you label NLD, or why do they have different labels? And you also mentioned that you don't like the word spectrum for disabilities. What do you prefer?
For autism. Okay, so labels, labels get a bad press in a lot of the disabled community. And I think that's not entirely correct, okay? Because a label helps describe a person. And you can apply a whole lot of labels to any human being. I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a liberal, I'm a statistician, all these things. None of them define me, they all describe me. And for anybody, you can come up with a whole bunch of these. A label like learning disabled can help you find support. It can get you special classes. Kid, you can get funded for some help in education. When you're adult, you can find people who have similar issues, which is enormously helpful. We just don't want to let it be a box, okay? We don't want to be, if the label says one thing and you're another, then you're the way you are. And maybe the label is helpful, so let the label be helpful. On the spectrum, we hear all the time about the autism spectrum. He doesn't have autism, but he's on the spectrum. Well, I don't think autism is a spectrum. I think that implies much too much order. The classic spectrum is colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. Okay. Roy G. Biv. And that we say, oh, there's a hue, and you can say what wavelength it is, and 330 is less than 340, and so on. With autism, it isn't like that. Autism is a whole bunch of characteristics, and people can be stronger, more severe or less severe on any of them. I know a woman who has a kid who's quite autistic, but is very, very physically affectionate, which is not supposed to be autistic at all. But he does a lot of other things that autistic people do. He does extremely. He like echolalia, where you repeat what other people say. He has extreme stims, where you repeat a certain motion. He's very autistic, but he doesn't have this. Or you could be not have any stims, but have a lot of this or that. So I say autism is more like a ballpark. And somewhere at the middle of on the pitcher's mound, there's some guy who's like the prototypical autistic person. But it branches out in all directions, goes up into the stands, right field, left field, and so on, as opposed to this order of just more autistic or less autistic.
And that ballpark applies to NLDs as well, because the core is a nonverbal learning disability, but the way it applies to other people is very different. Everybody who has an NLD acts a bit different, which is where there makes it very difficult to homogenize a label for an NLD as a collective.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that a label is not, as you mentioned just now, it doesn't define you. It just helps you coordinate who you are or react. Meaning it doesn't change who you are. It just having a label or obtaining a label doesn't change the person who it is. It just means that they now have a label, and as you mentioned, they get support with that label,
right,
which they couldn't have otherwise.
Of course, you have to get the right label. You get the wrong label, it can be very hurtful. But if you get the right label, it can be useful.
Cool, Peter. Thank you. Honestly, I do not have any more questions. Would you like to? Would you like to make? I think we covered pretty much the entire book.
Well, all right.
Any other comments that you'd like to mention about the book?
No, it's kind of old, but it's available in the usual online places. I hope that people who buy it like it, find it useful. I know there were typos. I mean, it was self-published, so there's a bunch of typos and things like that. And I'm working on another book, which is going to be a memoir, but I'm not sure when that's going to come out.
Well, Peter, technically speaking, this book is very personal to you because you are an NLD, and you mentioned a lot of childhood experiences and, of course, adult experiences having an NLD. Would you like to describe more of your childhood as an NLD, how that impacted you?
Oh, well, my mother started a school for me. When I was in nursery school, I was asked not to return to preschool. And my mother got together with a teacher, Elizabeth Friedis, and together they started a school, and that was great. And then after that, I left that school at age 9. I went to mainstream schools, and I did not have a fun time at all. I wrote a blog post called "Drowning in the Mainstream," So I understand why there is mainstreaming. Mainstreaming was put in because prior to that, kids were being treated absolutely horribly, institutionalized and not taught at all, and ignored and abused and all sorts of. So that was horrible. But some kids swim in the mainstream and some kids can't. Okay. And I say that, you know, with our own kid, he was in special ed all the way through high school. And people said, don't you want it to be in the mainstream? And I said, well, you know, you spend 12 or 16 or maybe a little bit longer in 12 or 16 years in school, maybe a little longer, but that's the usual. And then you graduate from high school or college at, you know, what, at 18, 22, something like that. And these days, the life expectancy is about 80 years. You can spend 60 years outside of school. I want that to be mainstream. I want my kid to have I want people to have a happy adulthood. And if your kid needs a lot of intervention in grade school, in high school, then they should get that, because then they can develop and be secure and so on. Now, there are kids, of course, with disabilities who can survive in the mainstream. It's tricky and there's levels. But even though things have gotten better, there's still a lot of teasing, there's still bullying, there's still all sorts of bad things happening to kids with disabilities. How they react to it, how the school reacts to it, how teachers react to it is all going to be individual. And so that's stuff that you have to think about with your particular kid and the particular school they're in. And also, a lot of people nowadays with kids who have these issues are homeschooling the kid, which is an option that just was not heard of at all. Nobody, you didn't homeschool your kid. I mean, maybe some people did, but no, not really. And nowadays, it's, you know, obviously not nearly as popular as sending your kid to school, but there's a lot of resources if you want to homeschool their kid. And then you can adopt the curriculum to fit them exactly. And obviously, there's some difficulties with it, but it's not a panacea. It's not for everybody, but that can be a good option too.
Thank you, Peter, for this wonderful conversation, and hope to see you soon.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everybody who is listening, and Peter.
Okay, you're welcome, and thanks for having me on.